Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 6 or the wrap up of week 6 of organizational behavior. And I want to start off by saying that I really enjoyed everybody's presentations. It was outstanding. I think even your classmates in the classroom, they enjoyed listening to it as well because it was not only sharing something about yourself, but we also learned more about what leadership is and how it impacts organizational behavior. This week, we're going to be talking about organizational culture, and I apologize we didn't get into it deeper the other night, but we were just gonna simply just ran out of time. So we're going to talk about it today, and well, I hope you enjoy the lecture. Over the past 5 weeks, we've covered a lot of ground. We started off defining organizational behavior, which is the actions and attitudes of workers and groups toward one another and toward the organization. And it all started off 5 or 6 weeks ago talking about the workforce, and we started to examine what shapes worker behavior while they were at work. And over the past few weeks, we started looking into the methods that managers take to understand that behavior and how we can shape that behavior so that it ends up translating to performance for the organization. Before I start getting too deep into organizational culture, I want to say that I understand that a lot of y'all have already talked about or have learned about organizational culture in probably some prior business classes. I also understand that you're going to be taking an HR course or maybe even some future courses that will also touch on organizational culture. It's that important. But I don't want to overwhelm you with too much organizational culture talk, so I'm just going to talk about how it relates to organizational behavior. We talked about organizational behavior briefly in week 1, and just to help define that, organizational culture refers to a system of shared meaning held by members of the organization. And when we talk about organizational culture, it answers 3 primary questions, and that is, it answers how are things done around here? It answers what are the beliefs and values that this company represents? And it also answers how are workers supposed to behave? When you hear organizational behavior and organizational culture, you may ask, are these two different things? Are they the same thing? Or maybe you're saying, how did the one impact the other? And organizational behavior will in part be due to and continually nourished by the organization's culture. And what this really means is that organizational behavior is a product of organizational culture. So an organization's culture represents the organization's core value and beliefs. This is really what defines an organization and even gives it personality. I think about Chick-fil-A. When you visit their website, it very clearly states that their core values are customer first, personal excellence, continuous improvement, working together, and stewardship. And so I also invite you to go look at your company to see if you can find its core values and beliefs. And when you do, this will help you to understand what the dominant culture is. And the dominant culture expresses those core values and beliefs that a majority of members share and help gives that organization some distinct personality. Under the umbrella of dominant culture, there is a system called subcultures. And subcultures is comprised of a set of workers that have unique sets of characteristics or shared experiences or some form of commonality. And you can see from the list on the screen, subcultures can run the gamut. There's tons of subcultures that could exist inside of an organization. But you got to remember that just because the subculture is unique in its own way, it still operates under that umbrella of core values or that dominant culture. Subcultures can be both positive and negative. So, for example, a positive influence or a positive subculture may be a group of Christian workers, and they witness about Christ inside that organization. Obviously, as a Christian, that would be a positive influence on any organization. However, a subculture may be counterintuitive to the dominant culture. This is because it becomes very deviant or resistant to the dominant culture. If you conduct a cultural analysis, if you conduct a survey, or even if you hear through word of mouth that a subculture or even a counterculture exists, it's something it's worth investigating. Subcultures or countercultures, I mean, it can emerge for a number of reasons. First, it's because it's a response to change. Maybe there was a policy change. Maybe there was new ownership took over. Maybe there was some sort of a change in the way we do things. And so a counterculture will develop. If leaders fail to address a particular need, or if new leadership takes over and there are some shortcomings, such as unethical behavior, I think you get the idea. Anything that kind of goes against the grain of people, a subculture can obviously develop. And when this subculture or this counterculture becomes marginalized or feeling like they're othered in any way, then they begin to galvanize even more, and it gives them a renewed sense of status and a shared purpose. So when a counterculture really starts to develop, it's best to investigate why. If you really do suspect a subculture like that exists, you need to start taking those steps to investigate. If you have any kind of subculture at all, you need to start paying attention to what they are, or why do they exist, what makes them tick, what's their beliefs, what their ideas and attitudes are. And this just helps you as a manager to get a better definition of them. And it also helps us to preserve that dominant culture. And we can start to preserve that dominant culture by first recognizing the existence of that subculture. Sometimes when you just recognize that subculture, it goes a long way, and it acts as a positive influence on that subculture. They appreciate you paying attention to them, is what I'm trying to say. It helps to encourage positive characteristics from the subculture, and this means encouraging positive behavior. Obviously, if you have a positive subculture already in place, this just really reinforces their behavior. If you know that there is a counterculture in place, and you're just trying to reverse this counter effect that's taking place, you're trying to figure out, how do I go about reversing this negative attitude or negative belief that they hold? And this may require additional investigation. You want to also consider bringing subcultures into the decision making when planning organizational wide initiatives, or even just listening to them. We talked about this before in class. Listening goes a long way. For example, if you know that you're going to be changing policy there at the organization, you don't just want to throw it into the handbook. You don't want to post it up on the wall and then say, here it is. Sometimes it helps to really bring those subcultures in and let them either participate in some decision makings or let them know in advance. At least respect that part of the subculture. Also, it's important to watch for shifts in the subculture. If it's positive and they begin to shift towards being negative, then we obviously have a sign here that something went wrong in the organization. We need to investigate why and reverse whatever it is that we started to do. If there are further shifts in the counterculture to something more darker, more resistant, more counterintuitive, then that's an immediate necessity to try to alleviate that disruptive behavior. And that really brings me to the next step, and that is rooting out disruptive behavior. It may require removing the manager, the supervisor. I mean, let's say it's a department, because a department can be a subculture. And let's say it is a department, and maybe the manager, the supervisor is kind of the head of this group. It may require us reassigning employees or a group of employees, distributed it out. Don't make them a one collective force. Maybe requiring hiring new people. You have to do whatever it takes to preserve the organizational culture, all within the framework of being legal and ethical and moral. If defiance and resistance is due to poor leadership or bad organizational practice, then we must start to reevaluate how we are operating. If this sounds like a lot of work, it is, but it is worth it to try to preserve that dominant culture. Each of us has heard of the term organizational climate. The climate of an organization is the overall mood or atmosphere or spirit that exists inside of an organization. You probably have heard, if you probably have joined an organization and the mood was very thick, very dismal, almost sad. This kind of feeling can be momentary or it can be long term. I mentioned earlier in the course, I was talking about my dissertation and the investigation that I took on the school system. And when I found out through my interviews with teachers, they were telling me how the climate there inside the school system was very depressing. It was very frustrating. It was they dreaded coming to work. The problem here is that they experienced a workplace that they wanted to work at, but it was the organizational practices, it was the policies, it was leadership, it's those kind of factors that kind of tainted these hopes of working for a great organization. On the other hand, you may have experienced, yourself, you may have experienced walking into a job, or maybe you've walked into somebody else's workplace and the mood was very upbeat. It was positive and it was almost kind of addictive, and you wanted to be part of it. This is what climate can do. It can bring a person down, it can bring a person up. I want to go back to those teachers. The teachers, they loved being a teacher, but it was where they worked at. And so even though you may love this job, the climate can really ruin it for you. So both of these examples, show you how organizational climate can be a direct reflection of the culture. So this is how an organizational culture begins. The culture really ultimately begins with its founders. The founders will establish the vision and the values of the company. And then the leaders begin to impart their beliefs on all of the organization's members. And it's kind of like planting seeds, and they begin to cultivate it and grow. They sustain the culture by hiring people who are a good fit for the culture. And then they begin to indoctrinate employees into that culture of the organization. Then they begin to encourage employees to begin to identify and internalize these beliefs and values and assumptions of the organizational founders. So it's really a long, lengthy process, but it works. And it begins it's just trying to make people adopt these beliefs, either from those who exist inside the organization and people who are brought into the organization. It's a constant reminder, if you want to think of it that way, of what the organizational culture is. When employees are newly hired, they are generally unaware of the organization's culture unless they went and started to investigate, through websites or publications and stuff like that. But generally, they are unaware. I can probably bet that when you join an organization, you're probably unaware of their culture. It's just not something that's widely publicized. Organizational leaders try to transmit that culture to workers in several ways. Edgar Schein, he was an organizational culture scholar, and he really wrote the book on this. And he found that organizations transmit their culture through storytelling, through rituals, symbols or artifacts, and language. So, first, um, the organizational culture is transmitted verbally. They may it may be stories or something along those lines that we will express during the hiring phase. They'll tell the employee, or this candidate, this is our culture. I want to let you know. Maybe after they hired, they'll express, what our culture is around here. So that's the one way we can transmit this culture. Second, we can engage in what they call organizational rituals. And what I mean by a ritual is that it's a reoccurring event that reinforces a particular belief. For example, if knowledge is central to an organization's culture, I'm going to say a department meeting is held in each month, and then those colleagues can teach each other about various areas of the business, or perhaps something is shared new about the industry. So it's just something that happens every month, and it's a ritual. I remember during our presentations this week, I think it was, I can't remember who gave the presentation, but somebody's talked about how they held a monthly meeting, and then they gave out stars because of something positive that happened. And it was a monthly ritual, and that was part of their core beliefs. And so they reinforced this behavior. Um, the organization may use symbolic gestures to reinforce the culture. For example, when you walk into a Chick-fil-A, you're surrounded by imagery, pictures from the past and from the present, and those images are accompanied by explanations about the core beliefs and values of the company. And so, when you talk about symbolisms, it can be things that are on the wall. It could be some sort of mantra that you see walking down the hall. It could be in your handbooks. It could be something that's flashed up on the screen. All kinds of symbols can be used. And last, the company may use language or organizational jargon, such as acronyms. And this serves as like a common denominator to help unite members, giving them a sense of identity within that organization. On the screen, you can see a Forever 21 sack, and you can see an In-N-Out burger uh, drink cup. And both of these organizations openly place biblical verses on the products. And this would characterize the company as a Christian based organization, and is likely embedded into their culture to some degree. And I entered or inserted the Monster drink can for juxtaposition purposes, and I'll explain. First, if you look at the can, it obviously is called Monster, and it gives off the appearance that some sort of uh, animal or a beast of some sort clawed the can. If you start to look at the label a little closer, it looks like an M, representing M for monster. It can also be perceived as being three Hebrew numbers. If you look at the Hebrew alphabet on the left side of the screen, you'll see a symbol, looks kind of like a cane or maybe a left facing flag, and that is a 6 in Hebrew. So if you look at the can again, it looks like three Hebrew symbols, which is 666. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is any intent of the company. I'm not saying that um, it's supposed to represent 666 or a number of the beast or anything like that. It's probably just a marketing ploy. I'm not sure. But this is how a person's perception can be taken. But regardless of its marketing, it made me, as a consumer, made me question about the culture of the organization. So I looked at its website. If you can take a moment, I want you to read this for a moment. And I want you to say to yourself, what does it say to you? And I'll give you about a minute or so to read that. Okay, so as I looked through the website, I found no evidence that Monster Beverages Inc. are devil worshippers or Satanists, which I never really suspected. And actually, as I dug deeper into their labeling, I found out that actually in Hebrew, uh, it's much harder to describe 666 than just three Hebrew letters. You actually have to spell out 666. And I'm not going to try to pronounce the Hebrew uh, enunciation for 666, but you kind of get the point. It's not just 666 in Hebrew. And the other thing is that I found out that Monster didn't even create the actual claw mark on the can. It was actually designed by a strategic branding firm called McLean Design. And so Monster Beverage Company really didn't have anything to do with their labeling. Regardless, though, I do think it's dangerous marketing tactics, because I'm thinking that if you're thinking that, it may, it's just not good. It's not positive, and it's certainly not in my Christian beliefs, if that's what they're trying to portray in any way, because they had to choose that marketing tactic. But as I investigated the culture, I started looking through their About Us section. And so when I came across this passage that we just read, I picked up on two distinct uh, statements. And one was, our monster at Monster, all of our guys walk the walk. And what is concerning about this is that we live in a very gender diverse climate. And this really goes against the grain, or against the norms that we live in society today. And the second thing is hanging with the girls. And this is in direct reference to their calendar models and that attend like motorcycle events and car racing, things like that, and some event models that they use. And while this seems benign to somebody, specifically women, it may seem a bit sexist or very insensitive to females. And so, if you stop and think about this, let's say that a female applied for work at Monster Beverage Company, and say, let's hypothetically say it's accounting, and she's there for the first couple of hours. She's been onboarded. She's getting some training. They give her a break. So she sits down at her desk and she decides to investigate about the culture of her company. So she looks around the website. She clicks on the About Us section, just like I did, and she reads this passage. She reads, at Monster, all of our guys walk the walk in action sports, punk rock music, partying, hanging with the girls, and living life on the edge. So they're saying at Monster. And that means at this company. So within a very short period of time, she starts to feel maybe marginalized, maybe even demeaned. And so it's that's how powerful that is for this new employee, all within a very short period of time on her very first day. And this is really how powerful a company's culture can be. And I only bring this up to show you how powerful symbolism can be inside the company. So, how do we positively influence an organization's culture? Well, some of y'all talked about it during your presentations this week, and that is, leaders should be visibly part of the organization and be role models. They should walk the walk. The other thing is we need to start communicating ethical expectations of our people. This only reinforces the healthy organizational culture that's in place. Next, we need to start providing ethics training to make sure that our workers, our managers, all of the above, really work inside that really tight ethical framework. And then we need to visibly reward ethical acts and penalize unethical acts. And negative workplace culture, well, it's cultivated by doing exactly the opposite. So now I'm going to wrap up the course by saying that everything that you learned over the past 6 weeks, whether it be from the textbook, the lecture, the assignments, the activities, and even from your presentations, it all means something. It's all very important. And I encourage you when you're sitting by yourselves tonight and you just have a moment to think, I want you to think about how each of these various aspects from the course has helped you to understand the importance of organizational behavior and how it contributes to the success of an organization. And as managers or future managers, what your role is in ensuring that an organization's behavior and psychology are positive. So I want to end by saying that you all are a great group of people and you welcomed me into the class graciously. You were always very welcoming, and I appreciate the time I had with you guys. I see great things ahead of you, and I pray that each of you finds success in whatever that may be. And if you ever need any guidance or any assistance of any kind, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I will do my best. I consider you all friends. So that said, I wish you very good luck in the future and good luck in your next class.